May the words of my mouth and thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and redeemer. Shalom all. Welcome to our continuing classes in how to live a godly life based upon the wise words of our holy sages as recorded in the legends of the Talmud. In Hebrew, the book is called Ein Yaakov. I'm, of course, your host, Ariel bar Tzadok. You find me online at KosherTorah.com. Tonight, we're picking up where we left off from last class. We're in a section which our English translation of the Ein Yaakov has so eloquently entitled, Fools, Frauds, and Felons. For a timestamp here, we are now in the week before the Jewish high holidays. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur is coming up, the days of awe, the time of atonement and repentance. And therefore, starting with last week and to continue now, I am discussing Talmudic statements of religious hypocrisy. And I introduced some very strong material in our last class. We're going to continue with this, of course, in this class. And a point that was made in the text last time, and is going to continue now, which is where I want to begin. And of course, this is on the nature of, if you will, religious authority, and how religious authority is to be wielded. As we know, we do not live in accordance to the same rules and parameters as did our biblical ancestors. I know many people in modern day who wish to look towards the Tanakh, the Jewish scriptures, and they will read a word and say, aha, this is the way and will and word of God. This is the way. The way in Hebrew is the way to go, lalechet, and the noun form is Halakha, which is usually translated as Jewish law. Well, a point that any rabbi who is truly a Torah-observant rabbi knows is that Jewish law is not decided by the written word in either the Torah, prophets, or writings. The Torah, or the written word, is the foundation where all things come from. How it has been understood, how it is to be applied, is something that is developed, evolved over a period of literally thousands of years. And without said knowledge, understandings, and insight, prophetically guided, spiritually inspired, and directed throughout the ages, one cannot, does not, will not know the halakha, the way to go, the path of proper Torah practice today. And a point that I made very clear last time, and I want to re-emphasize it now because it is so important. The nature of law is by definition fluid. Many people coming from a Christian, specifically, background are very aware of what they believe to be the way, or the word, or the will of God. And their attitudes are rather black and white. That it's either right and from the Lord, or it's just not. As a Christian would say, it's either the word of God, or the word of man. Well, in Judaism we acknowledge that distinction, and I've always said from the start, all rabbinic expressions are definitively the word of man. We have never denied that, cannot deny that. To deny that would be a violation of biblical law. Indeed, rabbis are emphatic to distinguish between rabbinic law and biblical law. And God forbid that any one of the two should ever be distinguished. With that being said, even with expressions of a rabbinic practice or rabbinic laws, As we have discussed, and as anyone who is familiar with the religion of Judaism knows, the ways and means of how laws are practiced differ from one community to the next. This is nothing new. In the days of the Second Temple, you had those practices and observances of the Jews who lived in the land of Israel. And they were different from the practices of the Jews who lived in Babylon, which was different from the ways and practices of the Jews who lived in Rome. Because each lived under different circumstances, a different environment, and therefore was subject to the rabbinic applications in specific ways, one which was different from another. Well, these things developed and grew over literally centuries. And in that respect, this developed into today what we call the major traditions. The major traditions today, you will have heard words like Sephardic or Ashkenazi. And as such, Sephardic, Ashkenazi are more cultural expressions of ethnic culture, which, needless to say, developed in different parts of the world. And as such, maintained those differences as long as the communities maintained their separations. But in the last century or so, all the more so now with the establishment of the State of Israel, you have communities which have merged and blended together, in which the only real differences in certain things are cultural or ethnic. And granted, there are always differences of opinion in regards to how law should be expressed, practiced. Now, I have a question here in text, someone saying, what's the difference between halakha, the Hebrew word for Jewish law, and derech, like in the term derech Hashem, or the way of God? The way of God, or the term the way of God, means ethics, characteristics, moral attributes, whereas halakha is actual behaviors of ritual practice. So, for example, the way of God is to be an honest businessman. The halakha defines what honesty is, how much you're allowed to do and not do in business with regards to this or that thing. So one is the inside, one is the outside, but they're both important. We introduced the concept at the end of our class last time about how certain people will open up a book, especially in translation, sit and read it, and therefore consider themselves learned in law. People do this with the condensed versions of the Code of Jewish Law. In Hebrew we call it a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. They will read these things and consider themselves experts in law. Or they will turn to the Code of Maimonides, written back in the 1200s. And they say, that is the word. That is the law. Anybody who knows anything, who's ever read the Maimonidean Code in the original Hebrew, and has a copy of those volumes, recognizes that the book, the Code, is on every page, surrounded by numerous commentators. Numerous commentaries by other rabbis who did not agree with Maimonides. Maimonides is not the prophet of God. He is a great sage who we hold in high esteem, but his words are the words of man, just like anyone else's. And judging from the numerous commentaries surrounding his words in the Code, and the numerous codes that came after him, Maimonides is not the final word of law. So people want to yell and scream, well, here's the final word, because we believe so. You can believe whatever you want. I mean, you can believe in the tooth fairy as far as I'm concerned, but it doesn't make what you believe so or applicable to anyone else other than yourself. And a point that the Talmud here is making, that such beliefs and such practices are considered dangerous simply because they misguide and mislead people. I know people, locally actually, who proclaim themselves Jewish, believe themselves Jewish, practice Jewish and Judaism in accordance to their own beliefs, based upon something they learned on the internet, from somebody who tells them something on the internet, which is fundamentally just not true, not authentic Judaism. As I said, people are going to believe and people are going to do whatever they want. Right? I'm not here to tell them they're wrong or right or anything of the kind. All I am here as a rabbi is to represent Halakha. And I will tell you what the law states and what it doesn't state. Therefore, the definition of a rabbi is not just one who passes a test, or actually it's a group of tests, to verify his ability of navigating the great code of Jewish law. Indeed, when you learn the code, it's not enough that you just learn the words of what we call Shulchan Aruch. You have to go into the earlier codes, which explain the history and development of laws. So ultimately, you have to start, if a law is based upon a biblical precedent, what that Bible verse is. How it followed through into a Mishnah. How it's discussed in the Gemara, making up the Talmuds. And then how the earlier generations of Talmudic sages understood and applied the law. This one may be in Europe. This one may be in North Africa. That one may be in Babylon. And saw then how codes embraced the other, one opinion or the other, whether it was the code of Maimonides, or the code of Rabbeinu Asher, or the code of Rabbeinu Yaakov, all the more so the code of Rabbi Yosef Karo, the famous code of Jewish law. You have all this stuff. Anybody who's a lawyer knows what it's like to study law. It's the same thing. So a person says, well, I read it in a book. Doesn't mean anything. We are now at a point here. And I will pick up now in our text. At the bottom of page 458 in our English translation, it says here, "Fear God, my child, and the king. Do not mix with people who are," the Hebrew word here is shonim. Some would have translated as different, some as inconsistent. Quote from Proverbs 24:21. Rabbi Yitzhak says, this refers to people who learn halakha, Jewish law, without having served under a Torah scholar. And therefore they are uninformed about the underlying reasons of the rulings of the Mishnah, or if you will, the law. This is a big deal. Many people today, the popular tradition today, is to study Talmud. So popular is that many years ago the rabbis of Europe developed something called a Daf Yomi program. That means studying a page of Talmud every day so that the entire Talmud could be studied in 7 years. As if this is some type of great accomplishment to rush through the words on a page which require tremendous amount of learning. But they consider this superficial accomplishment to have value. Needless to say, I humbly, or not so humbly, disagree. And I am not alone in my disagreement. Of all people, the chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, one of the leading rabbinic sages of our generation, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, has said, and I heard this originally orally, and then I actually saw it in writing to verify and validate that what he said, he actually said. One who picks up this tradition to study a daily page of Talmud prior to, before they understand Jewish law and its practice, is essentially wasting their time, and it's what he calls bitul Torah, waste of Torah study time. Why is this so? If you are a sage and a scholar and a rabbinic leader, where in which people turn to you to know what or how should I apply the law in this or that circumstance, then you start with the law. And then you have to understand the law. And then you have to be able to apply the law. But people who don't know the law, what are they going to say? They think they know something. that they unfortunately just don't know. And you will find, as a general rule more than not, an interesting and significant difference between Sephardic Jews over history and Ashkenazi Jews over history is that the Sephardic Jews accepted fundamentally the code of law by Rabbi Karo pretty much as the final word. Whereas Ashkenazim did not, and therefore subject to numerous different authorities. Sephardic rabbis have always placed emphasis on law and precedent. Ashkenazi rabbis have always based emphasis on Talmud and interpretation, sometimes coming to conclusions outside of what the Code of Jewish Law originally said in the first place. It's a different way of coming to conclusions. Which way is right, which way is wrong? They both have their merits. But I will tell you this, unless you know these things, practice these things, interact with both communities that know both ways, you have no business opening your mouth to say, Jewish law, Torah law, is this or that. Because, as I've shared in many a forum in the past, you can draw conclusions which are not true. I'll give an example. Somebody's saying something here in comments which I'm trying to read. I'm not going to read his comment because I don't agree with him. He's making a comment about how things are practiced with soul as opposed to not with soul, and that's not true. Because both communities have those individuals who practice with soul and without soul. I'm not going to get into that. But getting back to what I wanted to say before I was distracted there, but that's what these live classes are about, for your comments and you guys listening on tape. That's why you're supposed to be here, so I can comment and respond to you, which I can't do when you're just listening to this recording. But anyway, moving right along. Understanding and knowing the fluid way of what it is to know how to understand law. For example, we know from the Bible that certain foods are forbidden. What is the parameter of their prohibition? Is the prohibition to taste them, sense them, see them? In what amounts are they forbidden? In microscopic amounts, or measured amounts, or whatever. And what would happen if we're able to take something that is forbidden and we chemically change it fundamentally so that it no longer has any taste, any appearance, any real connection to its original prohibited form? Can it then be considered neutral and permitted? How's that for a good question in Jewish law? What do you say? You want to offer some suggestions? There are two very important ingredients of which I am speaking. One which is very popular, though most people don't know it. It's called confectioner's glaze. It is commonly found on candy. Did you know it comes from a crushed insect? But the rabbis say, being that it's so fundamentally chemically changed, it's completely fine. And you will find it regularly on candies with all the most strictest of all rabbinic certifications of kosher. Whereas at the same time, let's take another example. Pretty much the same. Something of from a prohibited animal source, which is completely chemically changed and altered. It has no size, shape, taste, anything connected to its original form. And you will find a split of opinion in religious authorities. Ashkenazi European rabbis will say that something which we today call gelatin is forbidden, and they don't use it. Sephardic rabbis, again Rabbi Avadia Yosef, say No, I'm of a different opinion. Because it has changed, it should be permitted, and therefore it is completely fine. Now you might shrug your shoulders and say, well, what's the big difference? What's the big deal? Well, I'll give you an example that an American would understand. You go to the store and your kid wants some cereal. And he goes up to the Lucky Charms, which have those little marshmallow shapes in it. Lucky Charms does not have a certified rabbinic authority to it because those organizations are Ashkenazi oriented. And therefore it's considered unkosher and Ashkenazi won't eat it. Come to a Sephardic house and you'll find Lucky Charms if those people eat that kind of stuff regularly on the shelf. Ashkenazi will look, oh, that's not kosher. And the Sephardim will say, yes, it is. So who's right? Who's wrong? They're both right. That's what you must understand. We have to move along. The Talmud now states that not understanding the fluidity and nature of law leads to all kinds of problems. And then they go into a little sidebar here, which is, I think, appropriate. There's a different way to understand this verse, where they say that do not mix with people who are, and they translate that last word, remember we said shonim? From the word shonim means to repeat. Don't mix with people who are the repeaters. So what does Rav Huna say? What does that mean? He says that when a person commits a transgression and repeats it, it appears to him as if it were permitted. So Rabbi Yitzhak says, let us know that that's not actually the meaning of this verse, but the teaching nonetheless is still foundational. And it's important. Why? Because psychologically speaking, when we know something shouldn't be done, there's a barrier. And when we violate that psychological barrier, that inner fear, we say, God's not going to strike me dead. And that which you was so fearful to do a first time, you're less fearful to do the second. And by the third or the fourth, he's saying, what the heck? This is a lack of character. This is how, as we say, you open up an inch and you let in a mile. It's a problem for people who cannot control behavior. And it's something that should be noted and watched. And now, for the sake of brevity in time, I want to skip a little. And if we have time at the end, then I'll get back to what I skipped. The Mishnah says now, an overly pious woman causes destruction of the world. And the Gemara says, the rabbis taught, a girl who prays constantly, a frivolous widow, and a, in quote, minor whose months are not completed. And what that means we'll find out. They cause the destruction of the world. And they say here in the commentary, because they use their piety to cover up their shameful behavior. Again, religious hypocrisy. Always a problem. There is, for example, now that he's mentioning here, hypocritical women. There is a group of women today growing in popularity for God only knows what reasons, both in Israel and in certain religious communities here in the United States, that have adopted the most strictest of Muslim observances in wearing a full head-to-toe black burqa. Now, the women who do this say, well, that's the most proper and modest way. Maybe, maybe not. But what it certainly is not is the Jewish way. And indeed, as I've seen rabbis comment, the women who adopt these burqas do so because they consider it modest. The Hebrew word for modest is tsinu'ah. But the concept of tsinu'ah is not just modest. It means to go without being noticed. Not to be flamboyant, but to be toned down. And the point that the rabbis make is this, that these women in their burqas are the last thing, the opposite thing of being toned down. The last thing, and the opposite thing of being unnoticed. On the contrary, it's their burqas that bring all attention to them. They therefore are the absolute contradiction of modesty and sinu'ah for Jewish women in a Jewish community. I'm not talking about Muslim women in a Muslim community. We're not even talking about Jewish women in a Muslim community. But we don't live in a Muslim community. This is Israel or the United States, soon Canada and elsewhere. This is not Tehran, Kahir, or Aruba de Saud. These are the places, if you lived there as a Jew, which you probably wouldn't want to, maybe there the women would wear their burqas like all the other women, but not here. And to do so is a contradiction. It is evidence and point of exactly what we're talking about, of confusion, of the absolute opposite of what they intend to accomplish. So, the Gemara says, let's learn some things. Listen to this. It says, we can learn fear of sin from a girl, and we can trust that good deeds will be rewarded from a widow. Fear of sin from a girl. How? Because Rabbi Yochanan once heard a girl prayerfully fall on her face saying, Master of the universe, you've created, says here, Gan Eden and Gehinnom, heaven and hell, you've created evildoers and righteous. May it be well that no one should stumble because of me and forfeit the share in Garden of Eden, heaven, and land up in hell. This is a woman. Now, guys, you and I know this, and women, you probably do too. There are women out there who crave attention, who are flirtatious by nature, and it exists in the most ultra-orthodox of religious communities as exists anywhere in any secular world. It exists in every religious community, Jewish, Christian, I would say even Muslim or elsewhere, where in which women act in a certain way, dress in a certain way, interact with men in a certain way, which draws attention to themselves. And many times they become subject to unwanted attention, to which they then feel offended by, to which many who will be honest with them and say, well, look how you're acting. Here we have a case in the Talmud where a woman says, I don't want to be a part of that. I want to be a righteous, decent, moral human being. And I don't need members of the opposite sex, pray God not of the same sex, looking at certain parts of my body as I'm walking down the street, as if I am a walking advertisement. And if you look at the kind of clothing that they sell today for women, everywhere, that's exactly what is promoted. Even in the most ultra-orthodox of religious circles, women today, forgive me, many women today, especially the young, dress like whores. With their big, fancy, expensive wigs for the married women, they won't give them up for anything. It's the contradiction of the ultimate modesty. Say against them, oh, you'll end up out in the street. This is a big problem. Here we have an example of proper modesty. I'm not going to argue issues of wearing pants or skirts. I'm not going to debate what is tight, what is not tight, what is revealed, and what is not revealed. These issues are discussed in the various applications of the law. You can go look them up. My point is, what's your attitude? And I think that this is applicable to guys as well. What's your attitude? What's your focus? And you darn well know what's in your heart. When you're spending all that time priming in a mirror because you want to look good. 100 years ago, I would have pointed a finger and said, that's you ladies. But today, with the existence of some perversion, I don't know what else to call it, called metrosexuality, where in which guys want to be as prim and pretty as the girls. They have the same kind of hair gel products. And they get their nails done. And all this other bizarre, effeminate behavior. And you talk to people, I like it like that. Yeah, it makes you what? Feel more manly? Okay. These things you will find Torah law says is not the way of a man and is prohibited. But try to speak to some men today. Now, ultra-Orthodox men usually don't have a problem with this. But ultra-Orthodox women, big problem. Simplicity. This is what I always teach people. Getting back to being simple. If you ladies, you want to wear skirts to your knees, to your ankles, I'm not going to argue. Gosh, if you're wearing loose pants, I don't care either. But if you're wearing these long, nicely fitted tight skirts and these nicely tightly fitted sweaters and the like, the rabbis have said this violates the spirit of what modesty is supposed to be, not to be noticed. And here we have the example of a woman actually praying to God. I know human nature. I know people love to turn their heads and fantasize. Dear God, please don't let me be the cause of someone's stumbling block. I think that's a very pious, upright position, which I wish each one of us would take. Moving right along. We learn from a widow to trust that good deeds will be rewarded. There was a certain widow who lived near a synagogue, and yet she used to come every day to pray at the yeshiva of Rabbi Yochanan, apparently which was some distance from her home. So he said to her, my daughter, isn't there a synagogue right around next to your house? In your neighborhood? She said, Rabbi, if I prayed there, I would not receive the reward of walking the extra distance to your yeshiva. Alright, so we see from the girl and the widow, these are held up as examples of righteous conduct. Now, do you really think that this widow was walking all that way so that she could look good and be noticed? Pray God, no. Alright? You want to talk about looking good? Let's go back to one of the most ancient legends that we have. The old Midrash that we find in none less than the Book of Enoch. I covered this in the lessons of the Book of Enoch that are available on KosherTorah.com. That it states there that when the angels came down from heaven, the fallen angels to take the daughters of men, that they taught the sons of men many different, what we call today, by lack of a better word, ancient technologies. They taught them all different ways to manipulate the minds of other men. And they even taught something interesting to the women. They taught the women how to use colors and cosmetics to make their faces in such a way attractive and appealing to men. Or in other words, the use of women's cosmetics has its origins with fallen angels. Many often call them demons. That's a clear source, written over 2,000 years ago. I'm not going to make any statements about women and their cosmetics, but I will say something I read from psychologists who look at the cosmetic industry today for women's products and made a statement that these companies commit an evil atrocity against modern-day women by stealing from these women their self-respect and sells it back to them for the cost of their cosmetics. You don't look good unless you have this lip gloss, or you don't look good unless you have this eyeshadow, or anything of the kind. Now, I am nobody's authority here, but speaking as a human being of the male persuasion, I've never seen a woman look better in cosmetics than she looks without. To me, a woman who is natural and raw, you get to see the raw beauty there, that's great. But when I see all this costume, when I see all of this clown paint, I find it Ugh. What can I say? Now, the Gemara says, when the Mishnah is speaking about women who bring destruction to the world, it had in mind, and mentions here specific instances. Someone called Yochni, the daughter of Retivi. She was a widow. Now, she would use witchcraft, it says here, to create difficulties for women in labor, and then offer to pray for their easy delivery. So, the Mishnah is referring to women who would use their piety, supposedly, as a smokescreen to cover their depraved character. Many of these supposed burqa women were involved recently in an Israeli operation, case there, because there was notorious child abuse within their families. That's piety? No. It's evil. It's disgusting. It's perversion. And it's an expression of this evil psychological aberrations of extremisms. Oh, we're not done talking about that. Very big problem. So, what does the Mishnah mean when it spoke of a minor whose months are not completed? They give an example that in Babylon, they explain this refers to a yeshiva student who would rebel against his teacher. Rabbi Abba says it refers to a student who is not qualified to decide halachic questions, but decides them anyway. And Rabbi Abba, who says in the name of Rabbi Huna, who said in the name of Rab, all right? What does it mean when it says in the verse Proverbs 7:26, she fells many victims. The number of her slain are huge. He says, this refers to supposed rabbis who try to decide halachic questions, but doesn't know how to do that. That they're not qualified to do that. And it goes into some other issues peripherally, but I'm going to be brief because I want to spend focus on what's coming. Again, the focus is, we must understand the living, fluid nature of Torah and practice. Where I live here in eastern Tennessee, we live and follow the law in accordance to the ways of how things are here. For those of you who will come and visit me here, as you know, I welcome all welcome guests. You'll find that my daily dress is coveralls or jeans and a t-shirt and dirty old boots, because I live in a rural outdoor area. And yet, if and when I have to give a lecture or make a visit to any urban area, such as a New York, Chicago, and the like, I'll put on a more decent outfit appropriate to that urban area. Some would say, oh, what are you changing for? Well, I don't know. I guess the same reason why I change when I go to bed at night and I put on my pajamas. Because that's appropriate for the time. When I go into the bathroom, I put on my bathrobe. That's not something that requires any great wisdom to understand, does it? I would think anybody should understand this. You might have heard an old saying, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Well, I've heard it said that actually has its source in no other place than our Talmud, where in which the sages of either Babylon or the land of Israel were traveling to Rome. And the question was asked, well, which traditions should we follow? Those of our home or those of our hosts? And the answer was, when in Rome, you do as the Romans do. When I am a guest in the home of another, I always accept and live by their traditions, whether it's ritual and practice or rules of the house. When we go and visit Grandma, I make sure the kids know that's Grandma's house, and what she says is the law. And that should be the way it is with everybody. We always show respect and honor. We don't try to impose things from outside. Say, well, I do things my way. You show respect where you can be shown the door. And now, a very important point. A very important section that is very important to read. And I want to spend the rest of our time on this. This is a section which has echoes in earlier literature. those of you who have any kind of a Christian background might be familiar with the presentation of debate and argument that Yeshu supposedly had with the rabbis of his day called Pharisees. In one place it says the Pharisees sit on the throne of Moses, therefore whatever they say you shall do. But later he then condemns them as broods of vipers, whitewashed tombs, hypocrites. Even I, at one time, questioned the harshness of such language. And I'm saying, good gosh, what got into this guy that he could be so negative? Well, apparently, Yeshu is not alone in the condemnation of his day. And this is what we're going to read right now. The Mishnah says that people who pretend to be pious bring destruction to the world. For those of you who are with me live, I've just clicked on a photograph which you should be able to see on your screens at this time. This is a photograph that was taken this morning, September 12th, 2012, at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport. Okay, I will describe this picture and its parameters as we move along. But for those of you who are here, you can take a look at it. If you have any comments on it, you can always write them down and I will respond as I can. Let's talk about Pharisees. Our rabbis have taught there were 7 types of false Pharisees. Right from the start, the rabbis themselves, who are Pharisees, say, hey, you know something? That everybody calls themselves religious. Not everybody calls themselves ultra-orthodox deserves that title. There are a bunch of hypocrites. Now, these hypocrites that we're about to delineate are not actual political or social groups, but they're personality orientations of individuals who act in bizarre ways and cause more harm than good. Let's read. There is one called a Shechmi Pharisee, a Nifki Pharisee, a Kizai Pharisee, a Miducha Pharisee. The Pharisee who constantly calls out, let me know what my duty is and I'll do it. Then there's the Pharisee out of love and the Pharisee out of fear. And now the Talmud is going to describe the nature and level of hypocrites. The Shechmi Pharisee wants to impress others with his piety. It says here he acts like Shechem, who was circumcised for selfish reasons. In my many sins, I must confess, I've known all too many people who are so full of themselves that they have no room left inside them for God. They're so pious, so holy, so this, so that. They're so proud of themselves that they point the finger at God and said, you're lucky, God, that you got someone as religious as me, who is so religious. You better praise me. They don't say those words, of course, because it's not appropriate to say. But I know, I can see in their attitude, that's the arrogance that they radiate. A Shechmi Pharisee, like from the word Shechem. Then there's the Nifki Pharisee. This is from the word Minakef. Why? Because he's knocking his feet together. He's taking tiny steps, walking with overdone humility. How many people do you see who try to act so piously, so righteously, that with every step and with every word, they are so perfect and pure? And then, God forbid you should ever bump into them and disturb them. Roar! They can turn on you like a monster. At the time of this photograph, which is on your screen right now, a friend of mine was at the airport, made a statement. He said that while I was at the airport, while he was waiting in line, a group of some of these so-called religious people went and literally went straight to the front of the line in front of everybody else. And everybody started to murmur. And only he went up to them. And he said, "What are you doing cutting the line? Get to the back of the line now." And he said that they snarled at him. That they acted in a way that, ignored everyone else. But he wasn't going to take no for an answer, and they went to the back of the line. What kind of people is this who call themselves pious and religious and act in such unrighteous ways? Terrible. Let's move on. There is someone called the Kizai Pharisee. Oh, listen to this, because this is the picture that you should be seeing right now. Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzhak says, what is a Kizai Pharisee? He is the one who makes his blood flow, from the word makiz, because he knocks his head against the wall, because he closes his eyes as he walks so as not to look at women. What stupidity and contradiction to reality. What you see before you on your screen, unfortunately you guys listening to this recording won't see this, sorry. Again, the photograph taken this morning at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport of a group of supposed ultra-Orthodox people who are so pious and so righteous that they have black veils, hoods, over the front of their faces so that they cannot see women and the evils of the world. They literally look like absolute fools. To which they will probably say, "Well, I'm a fool for God." No, you're just a fool. You are exactly what we call here a Kizai Pharisee. Acting in ways, in public, which act so fundamentally against common sense that literally they stand out and people look at them with disgrace and embarrassment and think, if that is religion, that they don't want to be religious. No great rabbi does this. No leaders of the generation act in such foolish and stupid ways. And these people are so arrogant that they think that they're better than the leaders themselves, to act and to dress and to appear in public. And as you see, it's not just one individual. In this photograph that you should see, there are 3 of them. And literally, this is a common practice like the women in the burqas. They are so divorced from the reality of their own behavior that they are what the Talmud calls hypocrites. Ones who destroy the world. Major danger. That is what I wanted you to see. Moving right along. Here we go. What is the meduchia? It means pestle. Pharisee. Rabbi Ben Shiloh says, his head is bowed in a show of sanctimonious modesty, like the pestle in a mortar. Alright? And the Pharisee who constantly calls out, "Let me know what my duty is and I will do it." And the Gemara asks, "What? Oh, is there really something wrong with this? Is this not?" So he says, "No." Because what he's really saying is, what is there for me to do that I have not done already? Meaning, God, you should be so proud that you have someone as good as me. I am so righteous. Look how meticulous I am in observing all the minutiae of all these rituals. Don't you think I'm worthy of some praise? They don't say the words, but they certainly feel it. They feel a state of arrogance. I know religious people who are subject to racism, spiritual arrogance. The racism at the hands of the Ashkenazi, the Eastern European ultra-Orthodox, towards those of Sephardic heritage, is well known to this day. Indeed, in recent years, last year I think, if not the year before, there was a school of these ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi people in the city of Bet Shemesh in Israel. And they had equally ultra-Orthodox children of Sephardic ancestry. who wanted to join their Ashkenazi neighbors together in a girls' school. The principals and parents of that school said, we will not allow these Sephardic children into the presence of our Ashkenazi girls to contaminate them. And they barred them from entry into the school. The parents who were barred went to court to sue the school, and they won. The court ordered the school to open to the Sephardic girls. Now, if you have a court order, what do you think the school did? They refused the court order. We ain't going to do it. It got so bad that the court demanded that unless the school do it, they would arrest the parents who were blocking the court's order. The parents said, we're ready to go to jail. We'll sooner close the school than to allow our pasty white little girls of Ashkenazi origins to be contaminated by those Sephardi girls. And such racism continued. In spite of everything, the situation was never resolved. To this very day, in certain of these neighborhoods, children who are modern Orthodox are attacked on the streets, spit upon by these so-called ultra-Orthodox who look at them as being the epitome of evil. These are disgusting people. They are not religious. This is not an Ashkenazi problem. In all due respect, there's nothing wrong with Ashkenazi culture or ethnicity. There are plenty of good Ashkenazi people. Plenty. Whole communities. The majority. But ultimately you have these creeps. These vipers. Whitewashed tombs. Remember, you know what I'm saying. You see where I'm going with this. They are so divorced from proper holiness, the proper right way. And yet, they are embraced by the mainstream. And no one bothers to say anything. This is terrible. This is disgusting. Unfortunately, this is a growing problem, like a cancer, in the religious Jewish communities around the world. And like the Talmud says here, it is a great danger. And that is why I believe that this material must be covered, must be taught, must be shared, must be disseminated, so that hopefully we will have the courage to confront this bizarre behavior and distance ourselves from those, just like the verse in Proverbs said, from those who act in these bizarre ways. They want to be bizarre. Let it be known that they do not represent anybody other than themselves. So, the Pharisee out of love, the Pharisee out of fear. Abaye and Rava said to the Tana who was reporting the Braita, don't mention the Pharisee out of love and the Pharisee out of fear, because they thought that, out of fear, meaning out of the fear of the reward for a mitzvah, or out of the fear of punishment for violating a commandment. But Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and here's some pretty wise advice. A person should always engage in Torah and the commandments, even if he is not doing it for, it says here, for the sake of Torah. Do what's right, even if it's not for the right reasons, because eventually you come to do it right. I'm going to share with you a very interesting teaching. Many years ago, there was a great Ashkenazi rabbi from Brooklyn, New York, whose name is Avigdor Miller. Sweetheart of a man. I don't always agree with everything that he said, but this was a guy who called the shots like it was. And then he had his prejudice and racism against Sephardim too, but that's neither here nor there. Just like it's the Talmudic way to ascribe the words to its source, I learned something from this man. And we went to Brooklyn, New York, before he died to seek him out to receive a blessing for our child. That's how much I held him in esteem. He taught a lecture called The Artificial Man. You would think to be artificial, that's bad. Well, not the way he explained it. He explained it like this. He says, naturally speaking, we often are not very nice people. Sometimes, naturally, we're nasty. Sometimes, naturally, we're just not polite, nice. We can be mean and cruel. He says, when it comes to dealing with other people, become a liar. Become artificial. Instead of naturally acting bad, artificially act good. If you have something bad to say, lie. Say something good. Someone says, well, I would never do that. Blah, 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 blah. No, yes, you should. Yes, you should. If and when your spouse, gentlemen, hopefully you all know this, your wives would come home with a new dress and say, how does it look on me? The old classical saying, does it make me look fat? I don't care if the dress makes her look like a hippo. You know, you say, it looks beautiful on you, dear. And every wife, I don't know why she would ever ask her husband the question. She knows she should get the right answer. A compliment. If the man ever said, let's be honest, dear, makes you look like a hippo. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if the wife turned around and whacked him in the head with a baseball bat, and probably he'd deserve it. That's one of those little white lies you make for the sake of shalom, for the sake of respect. We see even from the biblical example with Abraham and Sarah, the vision of the prophecy of the birth of Isaac. Sarah said something, and even God told a little white lie about it. Go look it up, you'll see. But getting back to our point here. To be artificial. These are the famous words codified by Rabbi Meir in what we call Pirkei Avot, the sayings of our fathers, where he said, it says here, Oseh Torah shelo lishma shema yavo lishma. Do the Torah not for its own sake, so you'll eventually come to do it for its own sake. Let's take the religion out of it and let's put it in real words, modern day words. Do what's right, even for the wrong reasons. Because ultimately, you'll come to do what's right for the right reasons. But the ultimate focus is that you do what's right. Period. Regardless of your motivation. That is what the message is here. So, that is pretty much how this all concludes here. And, just to skip a wee bit, I'm going to conclude with a very, very interesting yet famous saying. In the name of King Yanai. Wow! If you know anything about the history of Judaism in the Second Temple times, King Yanai lived, if I'm not mistaken, before the days of Julius Caesar. King Yanai was about, 70, 80 before the Common Era, BCE. This is a day when the Pharisaic party was actually growing. It was becoming very popular in the movement. His wife was, due to her brother, who was a leader of the party, was very close to them. And King Yanai says to his wife, listen to this, do not fear the Pharisee or the non-Pharisee, but only the hypocrites who masquerade as the Pharisee. In other words, nothing to fear from religious folk, non-religious folk, but only those who are hypocrites, who masquerade as being religious. And how do you know? By their behavior. He says here, for their deeds are like Zimri, but they demand the reward like Pinchas. Remember the story from the book of Numbers. Zimri was a prince of the tribe of Shimon. And he went and took a Midianite woman, desecrating God's name, brought her into the camp, bringing with it a plague which led to the death of thousands. Pinchas was the grandson of Aharon, the high priest. In an act of religious zeal, he went in there and assassinated Zimri. Killed him and the Midianite princess together. A single spear. And God was so impressed with the act of zeal that He blessed him and made him to be high priest to come. Pinchas is considered the epitome of one who appeases God. Zimri is the epitome of the one who aggravates and antagonizes God. A religious hypocrite, who's all the accoutrements of religion on the outside, but the behavior in their character of how they treat their fellow human beings, with disdain, with arrogance, with sanctimonious behavior, clearly defines them to be hypocrites. Vipers, whitewashed tombs. Yeah, they belong in the target of the verbiage of Yeshu, because they certainly don't belong anywhere in the Jewish community. Christians, I'm sure, have the same problems with members in their own community, and I would assume that Muslims and others have it in theirs too. This is a human problem, a psychological problem. But if we want to embrace what we call kosher Torah, then indeed, that's exactly what it has to be. We really have to make ourselves better human beings. And I know people right here listening to me right now, and you know I'm talking to you. You've suffered in the community from hypocrites. Bums, people have taken advantage of you and treated you cruelly. Well, even though I am speaking about an individual who's listening right now, I want you to know that your experiences are not unique to you. Unfortunately, it happens a lot to a lot of people. You're not alone. So you don't go looking to them, in spite of the fact that they might be rabbis or religious authorities or anything of the kind. I've always taught, keep your eye on God, follow His path, and if you can find yourself a good teacher, that's great. I will try to be that. Can't always promise you I will. But I'll do my best by God to be the best human being I can be. Certainly one thing with me, as anybody who knows me personally knows, what you see is what you get. No one has ever accused me of being ostentatious. I'll drink to that with a little bit of my... Yep. As they say, l'chaim. Good stuff. Good for the rheumatiz. Yeah. Anyway, anybody ever come up here, I'll make sure you get a little bit of that rheumatism medicine. Alrighty. Hey, look. So I began this class before we went online. For those of you listening, just to give you a time date, this is the last class that I will be teaching before the new year 5773 on Monday, September 17th, 2012. For those of you listening live, I extend to you my thanks for joining me, for listening, learning together, as I pray friends and extended family. My blessings of happiness, health, peace, prosperity, protection for all of you, for all of us. That somehow, somewhere, someday, somebody listening to this recording in the future, my blessings to you too. Let's hope and pray that we have a brighter future with all good things. I'm your host, Ariel Tzadok. Thank you for all joining me. See you in our next class. Shalom. 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 See you in our next class. Shalom.